The first ships appeared over Seoul at dawn. Commander Hyun stood on the military base roof watching the sky turn black with alien vessels. Each ship was the size of a city block. There were hundreds of them floating silently above every major city on Earth. "Sir, we have reports from Tokyo, London, New York," his aide reported. "The same thing everywhere. They just appeared." Hyun nodded grimly. Earth's military had prepared for this day, but seeing it happen felt surreal. The ships looked like giant, metal teardrops hanging in the air without sound or movement. Dr. Yoon rushed into the underground research lab beneath Seoul National University. Her team of scientists was already working frantically to analyze the readings from their instruments. "The energy signatures are unlike anything we've seen," her assistant said. "Their technology is completely alien to our understanding." Yoon stared at the data flowing across her screens. 20 years of studying theoretical alien contact scenarios had not prepared her for this moment. The ships emitted strange electromagnetic pulses that seemed to interact with human brain patterns. "Keep recording everything," she ordered. "We need to understand how their technology works." Meanwhile, in the city's emergency bunkers, thousands of civilians huddled together waiting for news. The government had activated all disaster protocols. Tae, a young engineer, worked desperately to maintain the bunker's power systems as the alien ships began broadcasting something. The broadcast was not sound or images. It was pure emotion projected directly into human minds. Waves of hopelessness and despair crashed over the population like invisible tsunamis. Most people collapsed to their knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Children screamed. Adults curled up in corners, rocking back and forth. But something strange happened in the Seoul bunker. Medic Yoon noticed that some people were not affected as strongly as others. She moved through the crowds treating panic attacks and noticed a pattern. "The people who are resisting better are the ones helping others," she told Tae. "Look around. The ones caring for children or elderly are staying stronger." Tae paused his work on the power grid and observed. Yoon was right. When the fear broadcasts hit hardest instead of breaking apart, groups of humans moved closer together. They formed protective circles around the vulnerable. They shared water and food even when supplies were limited. Commander Hyun felt the alien fear waves crash over his mind but forced himself to keep standing. His soldiers looked to him for strength. If he broke, they would break. If they broke, the civilian population would have no protection. "All units, report status." He spoke into his radio, fighting to keep his voice steady. Reports came back from around the city. The alien broadcasts were affecting everyone, but military units that stayed together and focused on protecting others showed higher resistance. Units that isolated themselves or focused only on self-preservation collapsed quickly. Dr. Han made a crucial discovery in her lab. The alien broadcast targeted specific neural pathways related to hope and determination, but human brains were chaotic compared to most species. Where other aliens might have ordered logical thought patterns, human minds jumped randomly between ideas, emotions, and memories. "It's like trying to jam a radio that constantly changes frequencies," she explained to her team. "Their broadcasts work on predictable minds. Human consciousness is too messy and unpredictable." The fear broadcasts continued for 6 hours. By the end, half of Earth's population was in complete psychological breakdown. The other half had somehow adapted or found ways to resist. In the bunkers, Tae noticed something else remarkable. The humans who were helping others were not just resisting better, they were actually getting stronger. Groups that had started as strangers were now working together like family members. They shared skills, resources, and encouragement. "Look at this," Yoon showed Tae a medical report. "Stress hormone levels in the helpers are dropping while protective bonding chemicals are increasing. The alien attack is accidentally making us more cooperative." Above ground, the alien ships extended massive loading ramps. Creatures emerged that looked like giant insects walking upright. They wore technological armor and carried weapons that hummed with energy. The Vorthak had arrived to claim their newest conquest. The Vorthak commander surveyed the city below. In 847 previous conquests, the fear broadcasts had worked perfectly. Entire populations would surrender within hours, too, broken psychologically to resist. But reports from Earth were confusing. "Sir, we have compliance in approximately 60% of population centers," his aide reported. "The remaining 40% shows continued resistance behavior." This was unprecedented. No species had ever maintained such high resistance levels. After full psychological warfare protocols, Commander Hyun gathered his remaining functional military units. Many soldiers were still affected by the broadcasts, but those who stayed in groups and focused on protecting others were operational. "We cannot match their technology," he told his officers, "but we can make them work for every inch of ground. More importantly, we protect the civilian population. That is our only mission now." The Vorthak ground forces began occupying major cities. They expected broken, compliant humans ready for transport to labor camps. Instead, they found organized resistance groups, booby traps, and humans who fought with desperate creativity. Dr. Yoon and her research team were evacuated to deeper bunkers as the occupation began. She carried with her the most important discovery in human history: scientific proof that human consciousness was fundamentally different from other species. "We need to get this information to the resistance networks," she told the evacuation team. "If humans understand why they can resist, they might resist even better." As night fell over occupied Seoul, something unexpected was happening in the bunkers and hidden shelters. Instead of grieving their defeat, human survivors were planning. They told stories to keep spirits up. They shared resources without being asked. They created art on bunker walls using scraps and debris. Yoon documented everything she observed. Humans under extreme stress were not just surviving. They were maintaining their humanity and in some cases becoming more human than before. The first day of occupation ended with Earth officially surrendering to the Vorthak Empire. But in the tunnels beneath Seoul, and in hidden shelters around the world, something was growing that the aliens had never encountered before. It was hope that refused to die, even when death seemed certain. It was cooperation that grew stronger under pressure. It was the peculiar human ability to find meaning and purpose in the darkest situations. The Vorthak had broken many worlds, but they had never faced a species that became more united when attacked, more creative when cornered, and more determined when everything seemed lost. The invasion was over. The real war was just beginning. 6 months after the invasion, Jin found himself in charge of 50,000 human prisoners on the mining world of Keth 7. The planet was a frozen wasteland with purple skies and air that burned human lungs without breathing masks. Jin had been a factory supervisor in Busan before the war. Now he was the unofficial leader of Block 7, the largest human housing section in the labor camp. The Vorthak had appointed him because they needed someone to maintain order among the prisoners. "Another shipment arrives today," his assistant whispered during the morning work assignment. 3,000 more from the European sectors. Jin nodded grimly. The Vorthak kept bringing more humans to Keth 7. The alien overseers believed that separating humans from their homeworld would break their spirit completely. They were wrong. The new arrivals looked broken when they stumbled off the transport ships. Their eyes were empty and their shoulders slumped with defeat. But Jin had learned something important over the past months. Broken humans could be fixed by other humans. Former teacher Sue approached Jin during the lunch break. She was thin from the poor food rations, but her eyes still held the spark that made her a natural educator. "The children are forgetting Korean," she said quietly. "Some of the younger ones are starting to think in the Vorthak trade language." This was exactly what the aliens wanted. They had studied thousands of conquered species. Breaking cultural connections was the key to permanent submission. But Sue had other plans. "I need 15 minutes with each child group during rest periods," she continued. "I can teach them using scratches in the dirt, songs, stories, anything to keep our culture alive." Jin approved immediately. Within a week, Sue had created an underground education network that spread through all 12 housing blocks. Children learned Korean history through whispered bedtime stories. They practiced writing by scratching symbols in the dust with their fingers. The Vorthak guards noticed increased chatter among the human prisoners but could not understand what was happening. Their translation devices picked up fragments of songs and stories, but nothing that seemed like rebellion planning. Mechanic. One worked in the mining equipment maintenance bay. He had been an auto repair specialist in Seoul before the invasion. Now he maintained the massive drilling machines that extracted precious metals from Keth-7's frozen ground. One discovered something interesting about Vorthak technology. It was incredibly advanced but also incredibly predictable. Every machine followed exact specifications. Every repair procedure was identical across all equipment. Human mechanics worked differently. They improvised. They found shortcuts. They jury-rigged solutions using whatever materials were available. This creativity confused the Vorthak supervisors. Why do human repairs last longer than specified maintenance cycles? Overseer Kelthon asked Juan during a routine inspection. Juan shrugged and answered in broken Vorthak trade language. Humans fix better, use extra parts, make strong. What Juan did not mention was that he was deliberately sabotaging equipment in ways the Vorthak could never detect. A slight adjustment here, a loosened bolt there. Nothing dramatic enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to reduce efficiency by 20% across the entire mining operation. More importantly, Juan was teaching other human mechanics these techniques. The sabotage network spread through every work detail in the camp. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening in the prisoner housing blocks. Different human cultures were mixing together in ways that had never occurred on Earth. Korean families shared cramped spaces with German scientists and Brazilian farmers. Instead of conflict, this mixing created stronger communities. The Germans taught engineering principles to Korean children. The Brazilians showed everyone how to grow small food plants in the harsh soil using scraps from the dining halls. The Koreans shared meditation techniques that helped people stay calm under stress. Overseer Kelthon reviewed the daily reports in his command center. Mining productivity was acceptable despite the sabotage issues, but other metrics were troubling. Human prisoners were showing increased cooperation levels. Medical visits were decreasing as prisoners took better care of each other. Most disturbing of all, morale indicators were actually improving over time. This made no sense according to Vorthak's psychological models. Prisoners should become more hopeless and compliant as time passed. Instead, humans seemed to be adapting to camp conditions and finding ways to thrive. Perhaps we should implement harsher punishment protocols, suggested his aide. Kelthon considered this option. Previous experiments with increased punishment had produced mixed results. Harsh treatment did break some humans completely, but it also seemed to make other humans more determined to resist. The turning point came during the winter season when Keth-7's already brutal climate became deadly. Food rations were reduced. Heating in the housing blocks was cut by half. Several prisoners died from exposure and malnutrition. The Vorthak expected this crisis to finally break human morale. Instead, it triggered something they had never seen before. Jin organized the entire camp into survival groups. Families shared body, heat during the coldest nights. Stronger prisoners gave portions of their food to weaker ones. One and his mechanics created illegal heating devices using spare parts from the mining equipment. Sue turned the crisis into a teaching opportunity. She told stories of Korean ancestors who survived harsh winters through cooperation and sacrifice. Children learned that suffering could make people stronger if they faced it together. Most remarkably, humans began including other alien species in their survival networks. The camp held prisoners from dozens of conquered worlds. Most alien species kept to themselves, accepting their fate with resigned despair. But humans actively reached out to alien prisoners. They shared food with insectoid species who were struggling with the cold. They helped aquatic species maintain moisture levels in the dry camp environment. They taught flying species how to exercise in the confined spaces. Why do humans help other species? Overseer Kelthon asked Jin during a formal interview. Jin thought carefully before answering. All prisoners suffer same. Why not help? This simple philosophy was spreading beyond just humans. Alien species that had been completely broken by their capture were beginning to show signs of renewed hope after contact with human prisoners. By the end of the first year, Camp Keth 7 had the highest productivity ratings in the Vorthak prison system. It also had the lowest death rates, the fewest punishment incidents, and the strangest anomaly of all. Prisoners from multiple species were beginning to work together voluntarily. The camp commander received orders to study these developments and determine if they could be replicated in other facilities. But the more the Vorthak studied human behavior, the less they understood it. How could a species become stronger when treated harshly? How could prisoners become more unified when separated from their home world? How could defeated enemies, somehow, spread hope to other defeated enemies? These questions would soon become urgent concerns for the entire Vorthak Empire. 2 years into the occupation, anthropologist Mi found herself in the strangest assignment of her career. The Vorthak had moved her to Research Station Omega, a facility dedicated to studying prisoner behavioral patterns across 47 different worlds. Mi had been studying cultural adaptation at Seoul National University when the invasion began. Now she was being forced to analyze why human influence was spreading through the entire Vorthak prison system. The reports are consistent across all facilities, she told her Vorthak supervisor during their weekly briefing. Wherever humans are placed with other species, cooperation levels increase dramatically. Supervisor Velketh clicked his mandibles in frustration. The Vorthak had conquered 847 worlds by perfecting psychological warfare. They broke enemy morale so completely that physical resistance became impossible. But humans seem to work backwards. Explain this phenomenon using scientific principles, Velketh demanded. Mi studied the data carefully before responding. Human prisoners were teaching other species concepts that had no direct translation in most alien languages. Hope was one concept. The idea that current suffering could lead to future improvement was completely foreign to many species. Another concept was individual worth. Most conquered species accepted hierarchy as natural law. Stronger beings ruled weaker beings, but humans insisted that every individual had value regardless of strength or status. Most disturbing to the Vorthak was the concept of voluntary sacrifice. Humans would give up food, comfort, or safety to help others without expecting anything in return. This behavior was spreading to other species like a mental infection. On the Vorthak homeworld, strategic analyst Dal reviewed reports from prison facilities across the empire. The statistics were troubling. Overall productivity was actually increasing in camps with human prisoners. But so were resistance incidents, escape attempts, and requests for better treatment of non-human prisoners. The human behavioral patterns are contaminating other species, Dal reported to the High Command. Formerly compliant populations are beginning to question their treatment. Dal pulled up specific examples on his display screen. On mining world Zeth 9, reptilian prisoners had organized their first work strike in 3 centuries after human prisoners taught them about collective bargaining. On agricultural world Nex 4, insectoid workers were refusing to accept punishment of weaker members of their hives. Most concerning was planet Rith 2, where aquatic species had learned human concepts of individual rights and were demanding better living conditions for the first time since their conquest 4 decades ago. Former soldier Bin had been transferred to Rith 2 specifically because of his leadership abilities. The Vorthak thought they were punishing him by sending him to the harshest water-world prison facility. Instead, they had given him access to 12 different alien species. Bin could not speak most alien languages fluently, but he understood something more important. Suffering was universal. Fear was universal. But so was the desire for dignity and hope. He started with simple gestures, sharing food with alien prisoners who looked hungry, helping injured aliens reach medical stations, showing respect for alien cultural practices that the Vorthak guards ignored or mocked. The response surprised even Bin. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years began working together when they saw humans treating everyone equally. Ancient grudges seemed less important when facing common oppression. The key is showing them that resistance is possible, Bin explained to me during one of her research interviews. Most alien species gave up completely when they were conquered. They cannot imagine freedom because they have forgotten it exists. But humans remembered freedom. More importantly, they remembered that freedom was worth fighting for, even when victory seemed impossible. Within 6 months, Bin had organized a multi-species resistance network that spanned 17 different prison facilities. They communicated through a code system based on human mathematical concepts that the Vorthak translation systems could not decode. The network shared information about guard schedules, facility weaknesses, and transportation routes. But more importantly, it shared something the Vorthak had never encountered: coordinated hope. "We are planning something unprecedented," Bin told the network leaders during a secret meeting in the water processing facility. "A simultaneous uprising across multiple worlds." The alien leaders looked uncertain. Previous escape attempts had failed because they were unorganized and desperate. But Bin was proposing something different: a coordinated rebellion based on human strategic thinking. "The humans have taught us that victory is not about defeating the enemy," said Klex, a reptilian leader from Zeth 9. "Victory is about refusing to surrender our dignity." This philosophy was spreading faster than the Vorthak could contain it. Prison guards reported that even failed escape attempts were somehow boosting prisoner morale instead of crushing it. This was the opposite of everything in their psychological warfare manuals. On the Vorthak homeworld, High Command called an emergency session. Strategic analyst Dal presented his findings to the ruling council. "The human contamination has spread to 312 facilities across 89 worlds," he reported. "We are facing coordinated resistance from species that have been compliant for decades or centuries." The High Command discussed options. Traditional punishment protocols were not working against humans. Increased brutality seemed to make them more determined. Isolation made them more creative. Even execution of leaders only created martyrs that inspired other prisoners. "Perhaps we should study human philosophy more carefully," suggested Military Commander Thonvel. "To defeat an enemy, we must understand how they think." Dal activated a new display showing human behavioral analysis. "Human thinking is fundamentally different from all other species we have encountered. They believe suffering can have meaning if it serves a greater purpose. They believe individuals can choose to act against their own self-interest for abstract principles." These concepts were completely alien to Vorthak psychology. Their species had evolved in a harsh environment where cooperation was limited to direct family groups. The idea of sacrificing for strangers or fighting for abstract ideals made no logical sense. But the evidence was overwhelming. Human ideas were transforming the entire prison system. Species that had been broken for generations were beginning to remember what it meant to have hope. The first coordinated uprising began on the industrial world of Mech 7. Human prisoners and their alien allies simultaneously disabled power systems across 6 different facilities. The rebellion was crushed within hours. But something important had happened. For the first time in Vorthak history, prisoners from multiple species had worked together toward a common goal. The uprising failed, but the cooperation succeeded. News of the rebellion spread through the prison network faster than Vorthak communication systems. Prisoners across the Empire realized that resistance was possible if they worked together. Mi documented everything she observed. Her reports were supposed to help the Vorthak understand and control human influence. Instead, they became historical, records of something unprecedented: the transformation of an entire galactic civilization by ideas that refused to die. The ripple effect had begun. Soon, it would become a tidal wave that would shake the foundations of the Vorthak Empire. The order came down from Vorthak High Command on a cold morning that would forever change the galaxy. Protocol 7, complete extermination of all human populations to prevent further contamination of the prison system. Pilot Co received the evacuation alert while conducting routine supply runs between prison facilities. Her transport ship was one of the few vehicles humans were allowed to operate, mainly because her mechanical skills kept the aging vessel functional. "All human populations are to be terminated within 72 hours, the message stated in Cold Vorthak military language. No exceptions, no delays. Co immediately began broadcasting coded warnings to every facility she could reach. The Human Resistance Network had prepared for this possibility, but facing actual extinction was different. From theoretical planning, on Keth 7, Jin received Co's warning with grim determination. 50,000 human prisoners could not fight the entire Vorthak military, but they could make the aliens pay a terrible price for genocide. Gather everyone in the main assembly area, Jin ordered his block leaders. If we are going to die, we die together, and we make sure the galaxy remembers what happened here. But something unexpected was already happening across the prison system. When news of Protocol 7 spread, the alien prisoners reacted with shock and anger that surprised even themselves. On Ryth 2, the aquatic species that Bin had worked with for 2 years refused to accept human extinction quietly. The humans taught us dignity, declared their leader, Spleshkol. We will not watch our teachers die without fighting beside them. Similar reactions occurred on dozens of worlds. Species that had been compliant for decades suddenly found themselves willing to die rather than watch their human companions be murdered. The Vorthak had accidentally created something they had never encountered: loyalty that crossed species boundaries. Prison Administrator Yun documented these developments from her facility on the industrial world of Tech 6. She had been a logistics coordinator in Inshan before the war. Now she maintained detailed records of how human philosophy was changing alien behavior. The Vorthak expected other species to be relieved when humans were eliminated, she wrote in her hidden journal. Instead, they are grieving and angry. Some species are experiencing emotions they had forgotten existed. The first execution facility began operations on the mining world of Dren 3. 5,000 humans were scheduled for elimination in the first wave. But when the Vorthak death squads arrived, they found something unprecedented: aliens forming protective barriers around human prisoners. Commander Velthek had never encountered refusal from alien prisoners before. Stand aside, he ordered. The crowd of mixed species blocking the execution chamber entrance. This does not concern your species. It concerns all of us, replied the reptilian speaker for the group. The humans taught us that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. The Vorthak commander was confused by this response. These were concepts his species had no framework for understanding, but he had orders to follow. He gave the command to fire on any prisoners who interfered with Protocol 7. The massacre that followed shocked the Vorthak soldiers almost as much as the prisoners. Alien species that had never shown resistance were suddenly willing to die protecting humans. More disturbing, the dying aliens sang human songs and spoke human words of encouragement to each other. Young prodigy Nam had been working on a secret project in the research facilities on planet Kol 9. She had been a computer science student at KASTE before the invasion. Now she was using stolen Vorthak technology to create something revolutionary: a way to broadcast human memories and experiences directly to other species. If they are going to kill our bodies, we can at least preserve our ideas, Nam explained to her small team of human and alien collaborators. Every species in the galaxy should understand why we never surrendered. Nam's memory broadcasting system activated just as the execution squads reached Kol 9. Suddenly, aliens across the facility experienced human memories directly. They felt what it was like to love family members unconditionally. They experienced the human drive to protect the weak and fight for justice. They understood human concepts of sacrifice and honor from the inside. The effect was immediate and devastating to Vorthak control systems. Alien prisoners who experienced human memories began acting with human determination. They organized themselves using human leadership principles. They faced death with human courage. On the Vorthak homeworld, strategic analyst Dal monitored reports from the execution facilities with growing alarm. Protocol 7 was not proceeding as planned. Instead of eliminating the human contamination, it was spreading human influence faster than ever before. Sir, we have reports of Vorthak soldiers refusing orders, his aide reported nervously. Several execution teams have abandoned their posts rather than continue killing humans. This was unprecedented in Vorthak military history. Soldiers had never refused direct orders from high command. But something about witnessing human courage in the face of certain death was affecting even their own species. Commander Velthek experienced the first recorded case of a Vorthak developing what humans would call a conscience. After watching hundreds of aliens die protecting human prisoners, He began questioning his orders for the first time in his military career. Why do other species value human lives more than their own survival? He asked Dal during an emergency consultation. This behavior violates all known principles of evolutionary psychology. Dal had no answer that satisfied Vorthak logic. Human behavior continued to be completely unpredictable and somehow contagious to every species they encountered. The breaking point came on the prison world of Hex 1, where the largest human population was scheduled for execution. When the death squads arrived, they found something that shattered their understanding of civilization itself. Representatives from 47 different alien species had organized themselves into a protective formation around the human prisoners. They were not fighting with weapons. They were simply standing together, linking arms and singing human songs about freedom and dignity. The Vorthak commander ordered his troops to open fire. Some soldiers obeyed, others hesitated. A few dropped their weapons and walked away from their posts. "I cannot kill beings who face death with such courage," one soldier told his commander before abandoning his position. "The humans have taught these aliens something we never understood. Perhaps we are the ones who need to learn." The executions continued across multiple worlds, but each massacre created more resistance than it eliminated. Human ideas spread faster, through alien populations when humans became martyrs rather than just teachers. Ko managed to evacuate several thousand humans from facilities that had not yet been targeted. But she also carried something more valuable: complete records of human philosophy and culture that Nam had compiled into portable memory units. "Even if they kill all of us, our ideas will survive," Ko broadcasted to the remaining human populations. "We have planted seeds of freedom in minds across the galaxy. Those seeds will grow long after we are gone." The final message from the human resistance network reached every prison facility simultaneously. It was not a call for revenge or hatred. It was a simple statement that embodied everything humans had taught their alien companions. "We forgive our enemies, but we will never stop fighting for what is right." Protocol 7 had achieved its goal of eliminating most human populations. But in doing so, it had transformed the humans from prisoners into martyrs, and their ideas from contamination into revolution. The Vorthak Empire had broken human bodies, but in the process, human spirits had broken something far more important: the aliens' certainty that they were justified in their actions. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak began to doubt themselves. 3 months after Protocol 7, the galaxy erupted in the largest rebellion in recorded history. Former slave world Governor San led a coalition of 23 species across 200 worlds in simultaneous uprisings that caught the Vorthak Empire completely unprepared. San had survived the mass executions by being transferred to a remote agricultural facility just before Protocol 7 began. She watched from hiding as alien species who had learned from humans organized themselves into revolutionary cells using principles of guerrilla warfare and civil disobedience. "The humans taught us that freedom is not given," San announced during the first Interspecies Revolutionary Council meeting. "It is taken by those brave enough to claim it." The rebellion was unlike anything the Vorthak had encountered in 8 centuries of conquest. Traditional military tactics assumed enemies would fight for territory or resources, but this revolution was fighting for abstract concepts like dignity, justice, and individual rights. Intelligence officer Ray monitored communications from her hidden base in the asteroid belt between former Earth colonies. She had been a communications specialist in the Korean military before the invasion. Now she coordinated information flow between rebel cells across hundreds of light years. "The Vorthak military is designed for conquest, not containment," Ray explained during a strategy briefing with surviving human leaders. "They can defeat organized armies, but they cannot handle distributed resistance based on shared beliefs rather than centralized command." Ray's analysis proved correct. Vorthak forces could crush specific rebellion centers, but new cells formed faster than they could be eliminated. More troubling for the aliens, their own soldiers were beginning to defect when exposed to revolutionary ideas. The turning point came when several Vorthak colonies began adopting human cultural practices voluntarily. On the industrial world of Mech Prime, Vorthak workers organized their first labor union after learning about collective bargaining from escaped human prisoners. On the administrative world of Vel Central, young Vorthak citizens began demanding democratic representation in government decisions. These concepts had never existed in Vorthak society, which was built on rigid hierarchy and absolute authority. Our own children are being contaminated by human ideas, reported Domestic Security Chief Gronvel to the High Command. They speak of individual rights and question traditional authority structures. The Vorthak leadership faced a crisis that threatened their civilization more than any external enemy. How could they fight ideas that were spreading through their own population? How could they maintain order when their own people were learning to think like humans? Shipbuilder 1 had escaped the executions by hiding in the maintenance tunnels of a construction facility on the border world of Tech 7. He emerged 3 months later to find that alien workers had not only maintained the facility but had improved it using human engineering principles. "We reverse-engineered the Vorthak technology," explained Klex 9, a reptilian foreman who had worked with Juan before Protocol 7. "But more importantly, we learned that we could understand and improve their designs. Humans taught us that technology belongs to whoever can master it." This revelation spread through the rebellion network like lightning. For centuries, conquered species had believed that Vorthak technology was beyond their comprehension, but humans had demonstrated that any sufficiently advanced technology could be understood and replicated by determined minds. Within months, rebel forces were using modified Vorthak weapons, ships, and communication systems. But they were using them in ways the Vorthak had never imagined, for liberation rather than oppression, for cooperation rather than domination. The Vorthak military structure began collapsing under pressure it was never designed to handle. Units that had operated efficiently for centuries started experiencing internal conflicts as soldiers questioned their orders and officers struggled with concepts like moral responsibility. Commander Vel Tech, who had witnessed the early executions, found himself unable to function as a military officer. The human concept of conscience had taken root in his mind and was growing like a virus that attacked his ability to follow orders without question. "I have seen too much courage to believe that strength alone determines right," he confided to strategic analyst Dal during a private meeting. "The humans face death singing songs about love and forgiveness. How can such beings be our enemies?" Dal had been studying human behavior for 4 years and had reached similar conclusions. The more he learned about human philosophy, the less he understood why his species was fighting them. "Perhaps we are fighting them because they show us what we could become," Dal replied. "And that possibility terrifies our leadership." The liberation of the Vorthak homeworld slave districts came not through military assault, but through moral transformation. Vorthak citizens who had been exposed to human ideas began demanding better treatment for all prisoners regardless of species. Protests erupted in major Vorthak cities for the first time in their recorded history. Citizens carried signs with messages written in human languages alongside their own. They sang human freedom songs translated into Vorthak musical structures. "Free all prisoners" became the rallying cry that united rebels across species boundaries. "Dignity for all beings" became the philosophical foundation for a new kind of civilization. The rebellion's success was not measured in territory conquered or enemies defeated. It was measured in minds changed and spirits liberated. Every Vorthak soldier who refused orders, every alien prisoner who discovered self-worth, every conquered world that remembered freedom represented victory for human ideals. 1 documented the transformation from his position as chief engineer for the Rebel Alliance. "We are not just fighting for our own freedom," he wrote in reports that were broadcast across the galaxy. "We are fighting for the idea that all conscious beings deserve to live with dignity and hope." The final assault on Vorthak High Command came from within their own government. Military officers, administrative officials, and even high command members who had been exposed to human philosophy began questioning the moral foundation of their empire. "We built our civilization on the suffering of others," declared High Commander Zeth Cole during the historic session that voted to end the conquest system. "The humans have shown us that strength without compassion is not civilization at all. It is barbarism disguised as order." San addressed the First Galactic Liberation Assembly from the former Vorthak High Command Chamber. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to establish new principles for interspecies relations based on human concepts of equality and mutual respect. "We gather not as conquerors and conquered," San announced to the assembly. "We gather as beings who have learned that freedom shared is freedom multiplied. This is the gift humanity gave to the galaxy, not the gift of submission, but the gift of hope that refuses to die." The Vorthak Empire had not been defeated by superior weapons or brilliant tactics. It had been transformed by ideas that proved more powerful than any military force. Human philosophy had succeeded where human technology had failed, creating change that reached into the hearts and minds of entire civilizations. The tide had turned completely. What began as humanity's darkest hour had become the galaxy's greatest awakening to the possibility of justice, dignity, and freedom for all conscious beings. 10 years after the Great Liberation, historian Ju stood in what had once been the Vorthak High Command Center, now transformed into the Galactic Cooperation Museum. She was documenting the most remarkable transformation in recorded galactic history. The human influence spread to over 400 species across 1,200 worlds, Ju wrote in her comprehensive historical record. But more importantly, human concepts of dignity, hope, and voluntary cooperation became universal values that transcended species boundaries. The museum displayed artifacts from the liberation period, drawings scratched on prison walls by human children teaching alien languages, improvised tools created by human mechanics to repair alien life support systems, messages of hope written in dozens of languages by prisoners who had learned to see beyond species differences. Former Vorthak Administrator Kelthon worked alongside Human Counselor Hai in the Department of Social Rehabilitation. Their job was to help former Vorthak military officers adapt to life in a society based on cooperation rather than domination. The most difficult part is learning to make decisions based on what is right rather than what is ordered, Kelthon explained to a group of former commanders during a rehabilitation session. "Humans call this conscience. We had no word for this concept in our language until we learned it from them." The transformation had not been easy. Many Vorthak citizens struggled with guilt over their species' history of conquest. Depression and anxiety disorders appeared in Vorthak populations for the first time as they confronted the reality of what they had done to hundreds of other civilizations. But humans, true to their nature, responded with forgiveness and assistance rather than revenge. Human counselors worked with Vorthak therapists to develop treatment programs for species-wide guilt trauma. Human philosophers helped establish new educational systems that taught Vorthak children about cooperation and empathy. "We could have chosen hatred," Hai explained during a joint Vorthak human cultural exchange program, "but hatred would have made us like our former oppressors. Instead, we chose to help you become better than you were. This is what humans call redemption." The galaxy faced enormous challenges in rebuilding civilization on cooperative rather than hierarchical principles. Different species had evolved different social structures. Some were naturally individualistic, others functioned as hive minds. Many operated on social systems that had no equivalent in other species. Engineer Te, now elderly but still sharp, helped establish the Galactic Cooperation Council. His role was designing communication and decision-making systems that allowed radically different species to work together as equals. The key insight came from human chaos theory, Te explained to the first council session. Complex systems work best when they allow for individual variation within cooperative frameworks. We don't need all species to think alike. We need all species to respect each other's differences. The council chambers were designed to accommodate the physical needs of dozens of different species. Aquatic beings participated through water-filled communication pods. Flying species had specially designed platforms. Species that required different atmospheric conditions used environmental suits that allowed full participation in discussions. But the most remarkable change was not technological. It was philosophical. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years learned to debate and negotiate rather than fight and conquer. Ancient territorial disputes were resolved through mediation rather than warfare. former soldier Bin became the first director of the Interspecies Peace Corps, an organization that sent teams of volunteers to help resolve conflicts and provide disaster assistance across the galaxy. The Peace Corps combined human organizational principles with the diverse skills of hundreds of species. We learned from humans that conflict can be creative rather than destructive, Bin explained to new Peace Corps volunteers during orientation. When beings disagree, they can choose to fight or to find solutions that work for everyone. Humans showed us that the second choice is always possible. The Peace Corps responded to natural disasters, mediated disputes between species, and provided technical assistance to worlds rebuilding after centuries of exploitation. But their most important function was spreading the human philosophy that had started the liberation movement. Young human diplomat Lee addressed the 5th Annual Interspecies Assembly in her role as Secretary General of Galactic Affairs. She was born after the liberation, part of a generation that grew up in a free galaxy. Our ancestors faced a choice between surrender and resistance, Lee told the assembled representatives from over 600 worlds. They chose resistance not because they wanted to defeat their enemies, but because they refused to accept that dignity could be taken from conscious beings. Lee's speech was translated simultaneously into over 400 languages, but the core message transcended translation. The idea that all conscious beings possessed inherent worth had become the foundation of galactic civilization. Today we face new challenges, Lee continued. How do we explore new regions of space without repeating the mistakes of conquest? How do we handle contact with species that may not share our values? How do we maintain freedom without falling into chaos? The answers to these questions were being developed through the same process that had liberated the galaxy: cooperation between diverse minds working toward common goals. The memorial gardens on former Earth contained monuments to both human and alien victims of the conquest period. But the largest monument was dedicated to hope itself, the abstract concept that humans had shared with the galaxy, and that had grown into liberation for all. Ju completed her historical documentation with a final entry that would be studied by future generations across the galaxy. Humanity's greatest victory was not defeating the Vorthak Empire. It was proving that some things, dignity, hope, love, and freedom, are more powerful than any weapon or army. The humans never sought to conquer their oppressors. They simply refused to let their spirits be conquered. In teaching the galaxy this lesson, they gave every species the gift of knowing that no matter how dark the circumstances, conscious beings possess something that cannot be taken by force. The galaxy learned that civilization is not measured by the power to destroy or control others. True civilization is measured by the commitment to lift others up, to share rather than hoard, and to choose cooperation over domination even when domination would be easier. The new galaxy was not perfect. Different species still disagreed about many issues. Resources were still limited. Accidents and conflicts still occurred. But these challenges were faced with human-inspired hope rather than despair, with cooperation rather than conquest, with the understanding that all conscious beings deserved dignity and respect. The Galactic Education Initiative, established by former teacher Sue before her passing, ensured that every young being in the galaxy learned about the liberation period. Children of all species studied together, learning not just facts about history, but the values that had made freedom possible. We teach them that strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down, explained Cora, a young human teacher working on a formerly enslaved world. We teach them that different does not mean enemy, and that every perspective makes our understanding richer. The technological advances that followed liberation were remarkable. When species shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for conquest, scientific progress accelerated exponentially. Medical treatments developed by aquatic species helped flying species overcome altitude sickness. Mathematical concepts from hive mind species revolutionized individual problem-solving approaches. But perhaps the most important discovery was made by a joint research team studying human brain patterns. They found that the chaos and unpredictability that had made humans resistant to Vorthak mind control was not unique to humanity. Every species possessed some version of this creative randomness when allowed to develop naturally. The Vorthak conquest system had been suppressing the natural creativity of entire civilizations, reported Dr. Yan, a neuroscientist studying post-liberation psychological recovery. Freedom did not just liberate bodies, it liberated minds, to think in ways that had been dormant for centuries. As the 10th anniversary of liberation approached, the galaxy faced its first major test of the new cooperative system. A natural disaster on the mining world of Keth 7, the same planet where Jin had first organized human resistance, threatened to destroy the atmospheric processors that kept millions of beings alive. The response demonstrated how completely the galaxy had transformed. Within hours, rescue ships from dozens of species were racing toward Keth 7. Technical experts shared emergency procedures across species boundaries. Resources were contributed freely without expectation of repayment. This is how consciousness should work, observed philosopher Min during the rescue coordination. When one suffers, all respond. When one succeeds, all celebrate. This is what humans call community, and it has become the foundation of our galactic civilization. The rescue operation succeeded, saving millions of lives. But more importantly, it proved that the human legacy of cooperation and mutual aid had become permanent features of galactic culture. Former strategic analyst Dal, now serving as Minister of Historical Education,